Hello, everyone. This is part 1 of week 9 of Plato, a class on the Protagoras, Phaedo, and Sophist. And we are now turning to the Sophist. The Sophist is considered a late dialogue, and scholars tend to think that in these late dialogues, Plato is, as it were, raising challenges for his own philosophy, in particular for the metaphysical views that come up in his so-called middle dialogues, let's say in the Republic, also the Phaedo, the Symposium. And one of the core themes that we have looked at in the Phaedo is the distinction between being and becoming. At the beginning of the Sophist, we, as it were, see a kind of change of the guard. Socrates is there, but he's kind of handing over the leading of the conversation to someone else. And that someone else is just called the stranger or visitor from Elea. That is all we know about him. He is from Elea. Elea is the place that Parmenides comes from. So what Plato's kind of doing here at the beginning of the Sophist is to flag, we are going to reconsider some ideas that relate to Parmenides' philosophy. And maybe one of the main ways in which Plato has moved away in his middle dialogues from Parmenides, whom he holds in very high regard, is precisely this distinction between being and becoming. According to Plato, being is this domain of intelligibles, the forms, so-called mathematicals, numbers, axioms. And then on the other hand, becoming is the domain where things participate in being and not being. Parmenides, on the other hand, defends the disjunction between being and not being that is exclusive and exhaustive. And what that means is, or one thing that means, is that there can be nothing that is in any way both being and not being. But that is precisely what Plato's becoming seems to be. Because the claim is that it participates in being and not being. So this conception of becoming and this distinction between being and becoming is a big move away from Parmenides' distinction between being and not being. And to enable us to think about this, I want to return just for a moment to one of the most famous passages in Plato, Book 5 of the Republic, where Plato is developing his own way of thinking about this. The argument in Book 5 starts with Socrates saying, well, don't we say that knowledge is of something? And the Greek is T. And then he says, as if it was not a substantive further thing to say, that it is of something that is. So we have, as it were, two claims. Knowledge is of something that is. And in Sophist 237, Plato returns to that idea that a something is something that is. But by returning to this idea kind of explicitly, he's also flagging that potentially one could dispute this. And why would one dispute it? One thought might be that, well, this notion of somethings is somehow more general and broader, and that is something that the Stoics are going to argue. And that relates to Parmenides, because one of the big themes in Parmenides is that you cannot even think or talk about what is not. You can only think or talk about what is. But maybe it is possible to think or talk about some things, even if they are not. So that might be an option, a kind of idea, to think about an issue in Parmenides. Another dimension of this argument in Book 5 of the Republic that I want to mention here is that Socrates says that ignorance is of what is not. And I just want to invite you to ask yourself, what does that even mean? In the Republic, it is not elucidated. We just sort of move on, and the careful reader might think, I hope that Plato is going to address this somewhere else. Yes, in the Sophist. And why is it a tricky thing to say that ignorance is about not being? Here's just one example of ignorance in order to help you see why it might be tricky. And I would like to invite you to come up with other examples. Suppose someone is ignorant in a sense of sort of never having heard of it, of the parallel postulate. Now, if someone has never even heard of the parallel postulate, is sort of completely ignorant of it, then in Plato's terms, he would be ignorant of something that is, because the parallel postulate is a mathematical thing and thus has the status of being. And at the same time, this person wouldn't have any kind of mental state related to the parallel postulate because they've never heard of it. And that is just a way of kind of showing why the notion of ignorance and of any kind of mental state about what is not could be tricky, because once we mentally refer to something, it may seem that we are no longer, as it were, entirely kind of blank. Maybe we already then have a doxa or a belief. And it may also seem kind of really tricky to mentally relate to something that entirely is not. So that is a set of questions that Plato reopens, as it were, in the Sophist.